tonight talking about aged care. 3/4 of the COVID-19 deaths have been in this country in aged care facilities. That's 673 people. Those facilities are the responsibility of the federal government. In the past, gastro and flu epidemics have ripped through aged care facilities. We knew from Newmarch House in April how horrific coronavirus in aged care could be. How did the federal government fail so comprehensively to prevent this tragedy?
Well, first of all, on a couple of points, the Commonwealth Government put in $1.5 billion extra in support to deal with everything from workforce support to PPE and training and equipment to assist the aged care sector as it dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic.
And there are still 673 people.
Lee, if you could just let me finish.
But as long as you address the question, I'm very happy for you to finish.
Well, I am talking about what we've been doing to address the COVID-19
I'm asking
pandemic in aged care.
why you failed.
Well, Lee, I don't agree with your assessment. What I'm saying is that in aged care, what we have seen is the community transmission, in particular that occurs in Victoria, find its way into aged care facilities. But in comparison to what we've seen around the world, 8% of Australia's aged care facilities had COVID-19 cases. Now, that compares to 56% in the United Kingdom. We have acted. There have been a half a dozen cases where I would agree that the failings were acute, but they were not system-wide. In the vast majority of aged care facilities, what we saw is the system actually deal with the pandemic and prevent the horrific results that were seen all around the rest of the world.
Still, 673 people is still a terrible result. You're pointing out the steps that you've taken since all of this happened. They've been done in reaction.
No, that was during what was happening.
They've been done during what was happening in an ad hoc kind of way because you've had to respond in reaction to the crisis. The Royal Commission finds that the Royal Commission finds, I'm quoting from the Royal Commission, it finds that part of the problem with aged care is that continually making band-aid fixes on the run means we have not been able to resolve the underlying problems with a system that has failed to provide the Australian community with the assurance of quality and safety in aged care that it expects.
Well, Lee, that's why I called the Royal Commission. I called the Royal Commission because I've been aware for some time of the serious needs that are there, and we've got an ageing population and more people demanding appropriately services in aged care, and particularly in residential aged care, the needs are far more acute. This is not something that has just happened in the past couple of years. This has been something that has been transitioning now for over a decade and beyond, which the Royal Commission have also acknowledged.
Well,
that's why I called the Royal Commission.
Prime Minister, on the point of you calling it,
that's why we will provide our...
Sorry to interrupt you, but on the point of you calling the Royal Commission, since 1997, there have been 18 reports or inquiries into aged care, 12 in the past 3 years alone. Time after time in these reports, we hear of neglect, indifference, malnutrition, festering wounds, a lack of respect for human dignity. Isn't the only conclusion a rational person can draw from all of that over the years our political leaders have not cared enough about the elderly to stop the buck passing and to somehow end this sustained political neglect?
Well, no, Lee, I think that's a very unkind assessment.
18
the
reports.
Challenges in aged care are real. Lee, the challenges in aged care are real. And in aged care, funding increases every year by $1 billion, and then the needs become more acute. It's a challenging environment, and the workforce training is continuing to increase, but the challenges continue to rise. And what we're committed to do is respond to this Royal Commission of the Aged Care inquiry, as we said last night, and we will do that properly when we get those recommendations. We have already responded to the recommendations that they have made. One of the most important recommendations they've been making is about in-home aged care. Now, since we've been in government, we have more than tripled the number of in-home aged care places that are available in this budget alone. 23,000 additional, the single largest increase in in-home aged care that has been done on any one occasion. Now, there's 185,000 in-home aged care places now. There were just over 60,000 when we came to government. 97% of people who are waiting for an aged care place are already either on some form of in-home aged care or receiving other in-home assistance.
Prime Minister,
so I'm not disputing the nature of the challenge, Lee. I'm saying that it's a huge challenge.
We've been hearing this for years, Prime Minister. We've been hearing this sort of stuff for years, and we get the same reports out of aged care of neglect and horror.
Well, it's a difficult challenge, Lee, and that's why we continue to spend more on it and we continue to learn more about how we can improve in this area. Now, we've all had our own experiences with aged care, Lee. We've all had to go through those difficult decisions. I mean, and I've got to say the aged care experience that fortunately my family has had was a positive one. But the needs are greater when people are going into residential aged care, and that's why the transition is to people going into in-home aged care.
Well,
now, that is an important shift, and it's a shift that we have supported. But I'm not denying the challenge, Lee. The challenge is great, and the investments are being made, and the commitment is there from me and my government to address the Royal Commission that we in fact called.
Last week, the report of the Royal Commission into Aged Care, specifically looking at the pandemic, noted that despite the Newmarch House outbreak in Sydney in April, causing 17 deaths, and I quote, "It is unclear whether the lessons learned from those outbreaks were shared widely before community transmission put people living and working in aged care in Victoria at risk." How is that possible?
Well, the lessons from Newmarch were in many different areas, and they were applied as we sought to deal with what was a significant community outbreak in Victoria.
I just said they weren't shared widely.
It should not surprise.
They weren't shared widely. The Royal Commission found.
Well, Leah, I was there, and I know what came out. We commissioned those reports into Newmarch, and the lessons from, in particular, in terms of transferring of residents, dealing with communications, and many of the other issues that were identified in those reports were being put into practice by the Victorian Aged Care Response Centre, and that was done over many weeks and many months, and it ensured that we avoided a far more severe outcome. As I said, about half a dozen of those centres, out of hundreds and hundreds of centres in Victoria, were the ones where we had terrible results. But in the vast majority of cases, we were able to avoid that. As I said, Lee, I think there needs to be an acknowledgement. In the UK and throughout the rest of the world, where you get a community outbreak of the coronavirus, that has been reflected in what has happened not only in aged care, but also in hospitals and other health settings, because the people who work in these settings live in the community. Now, as the coronavirus cases have receded in Victoria, well, we have also seen the number of cases in aged care in Victoria recede. So I think it is not possible to disconnect what happened with the Victorian wave from the impact in the aged care area. That would be nonsensical.